Confirmed, Jacob Blake did have a knife during the time of his arrest. The Kenosha shooter has been charged with first-degree murder. Minneapolis riots and loots over fake news, and the NBA changes its mind. Welcome, everyone, to the Buck Sexton Show. Thank you very much for joining. Just a quick note to anybody who's in the path of this really serious hurricane. Please do heed all warnings. Take care of yourselves. You're in our thoughts and prayers on Louisiana, Texas, Gulf Coast getting hit by this pretty badly. And there's some real expectations of heavy flooding. Please take all necessary precautions for yourself and know that we're thinking about you to everybody and certainly all of our Team Buck brothers and sisters down in Texas, Louisiana, and the rest of the Gulf Coast area. So I had figured that there was something up with the case of Jacob Blake. Remember, this is now the latest version of the BLM narrative of cops shooting a man who is black and unarmed for no reason other than either an overt or perhaps a subconscious racism. But it has to be one or the other. That's what we're led to believe, right? That there's nothing else going on. There's nothing else that we have to see with all of this. We already know everything that we have to in order to come to a conclusion that the cop involved should lose his job, probably lose his freedom, really effectively lose his life. That's what the narrative is. That's what the expectation of the libs, the Democrat Party, has become. You're not allowed to wait for additional facts. You're not allowed to see if there's anything else that changes the narrative. George Floyd, enormous changes in that narrative since we first saw that video. And why is it that the public only gets to see a very shortened version of these arrests? It's absolutely necessary to see the entire exchange, right? Just think about this in day-to-day life. If you saw a video of a friend of yours punching a stranger in the face at a bar, and that's all you saw, you'd say, wow, he committed assault. That's a crime. You can't do that. If you saw a video of a friend of yours punching a stranger in the face at a bar, after that stranger had grabbed your friend's wife's behind and tried to, pull her toward him, you'd say, guy had it coming. All that the difference is there that you need to know is the information around the incident, right? That makes all the difference in the world. And yet we have this repetition of the same thing. We see one video clip. You better say the cops are racist and this was a murder or this was an attempted murder in the case of Jacob Blake, or else they'll ruin you. Corporations will fire you. You'll lose your job. Your reputation in tatters. That's the game that's been forced on all of us now. Bend the knee or else. This is how much power this movement, BLM, has been able to gather. And it's all built on lies. Built on lies, the whole thing. That's why it always ends up collapsing into disarray, anarchy, violence, misery. This movement is not making anyone's lives better. This movement is not improving anything in this country. And it's not the first time the movement has existed. Think back. When did the BLM start? Started in 2013 online with a hashtag Black Lives Matter. Why didn't that just continue in a straight line to today? Certainly Black Lives mattered as much in 2016 as they did in 2013 as they do in 2020. So why did the movement disappear? Oh, because there were assassinations of police officers that occurred as a direct result of the rhetoric of the movement that had followers that just believed what BLM was saying. The assassination of officers Ramos in lieu of the NYPD right here in New York, and then 5 Dallas police officers murdered by a madman who, yes, was also a devotee of Black Lives Matter rhetoric. And as I've said before, if what the movement claims is true, if law enforcement was really systemically racist and hunting young black men as some kind of racist sport, it would be a moral obligation to take up arms against law enforcement. Of course, that's all a lie, right? The same way that I could tell you it would be a moral obligation if a presidential administration was stealing people from their homes in the night, sending in the equivalent of the Gestapo or the Stasi to steal people from their homes. Yeah, you take up arms against your own government, right? But that's not happening. And to say that's happening, even though some libs do claim that stuff is going on right now, is completely insane. It's a lie. The fundamental problem with the BLM movement is that it is built upon lies, and therefore it needs further lies to perpetuate itself. Now, what do I mean by bringing up the Jacob Blake case? We saw that initial video, and I thought, look, we can't really tell if this is a good shoot. That's the police terminology. They'll say a good shoot, meaning a legally justified shooting, or not. We can't tell. It seemed to me from the beginning, and you can go back. You don't ever have to take my word for it when I say, oh, I said this, right? You can just go on Spotify, the iHeart app, listen to the podcast of the show, and just check my work. And I invite you to do that anytime. But if you go back, you'll hear that I thought this seemed like likely a justified shooting because he did not comply. Blake did not comply with clear commands. Law enforcement had their weapons drawn, and he was reaching in the passenger area of his vehicle, which is a very well-known place to all law enforcement officers for keeping a gun, a knife, whatever, any kind of weapon, a taser, brass knuckles, who knows? This is where people tend to keep those things because when they're in their car, they want easy access to it if they're going to try to use it. So that was with the information we had then, and we were being told, oh, he's just a dad who was trying to break up a fight between two women, and this is so awful, and it's this terrible murder. And all the Democrats, oh my gosh. It turns out the guy's wanted on a variety of crimes, including sexual assault, which I thought Democrats were always telling us how serious that is as a crime. It is a very serious crime. So isn't that noteworthy here? He's wanted on a felony arrest warrant. The police were called. This is what we found out since that initial day that, remember, led to riots, led to destruction and looting. We find out that the police were called because of Blake, that he was the reason. This is based on the radio transmissions from the officer's patrol car, right? They have recordings of this. The police were told, yeah, it's because of this guy, and there's a warrant for him. So they show up to a domestic disturbance with a guy with a felony sexual assault warrant against him. They try to take him to the ground. They use a taser on him. He manages to, because remember, you can't use chokeholds, you can't use these submission holds anymore, can't do any of that. He manages to get away from the two officers, which if you've ever tried to hold somebody who really is, desperate to get away from you, if you're of even roughly equivalent strength, very difficult to do. Very hard to hold somebody down when you're not also allowed to strike them, put them in submission holds. If you're just going to try to hold them, bear hug them. So he gets away from the two officers, goes around to his car. The officers know that now this is a high threat situation. Why isn't he complying? He's already fought them. He's a wanted felon. Alleged felon. Why is none of that registering with him? What could he possibly be thinking? There are multiple officers with guns drawn on him. If he won't listen to that, what does he have in mind? These are the thought processes of the officers on the scene. You can just think through it yourself. Put yourself in their shoes. And then he is clearly trying to get into his car and is reaching for something. He has an officer with his holding his T-shirt from behind, trying to pull him out of the vehicle. what does this guy think he's accomplishing at this point? Some of us, like me, were saying, how is it that we did not know right away, day one? Why did we not know that there was in this Kenosha? Remember, this has led to the whole conflagration this week. Was this one arrest and shooting? Did Blake have a gun or a weapon in the car? Go back yesterday's show, the day before that, I kept asking, why do we not know this? Why do we not know if there was a weapon in the car? Now remember, the standard for law enforcement isn't that they need to be able to guess whether you have a weapon accurately. It's if they have a credible reason to believe that a person is going to imminently use a weapon on them, they can use lethal force. If someone wants to commit suicide by cop, which does happen, and they have their hand at their waistband, and they say, I've got a gun, and the officer says, show me your hands, and the suspect says, I've got a gun, and the officer says, I'm going to shoot unless you show me your hands, and the person pulls their hand out from behind them and they get shot in that process. This actually happens. This same event plays out, tragically, across the country many, many times over. If that person has a Snickers bar in his hand, if that person has a rusty spoon, it doesn't matter. If the cop shoots that person, they're going to be cleared for that because they don't have to wait when someone has already presented themselves as being armed and a threat. They don't have to wait to make out the serial number on the Heckler and Koch that is being pointed at them. They just get to defend themselves. But that's not even what happened here. Took a few days, millions of dollars of damage, people killed in the street, cops assaulted, the country torn apart again over issues of race. Took a few days. But we find out that, yes, in fact, Jacob Blake did have a knife in the car under the driver's seat that he was reaching for. Confirmed. Oh, is that, why did it take a few days for that information to get out there? Why weren't the police allowed right away to tell us this? Oh, well, a lot of politics involved. You know, don't want to look like they're blaming the victim, right? People get very scared about that. Oh, we don't want to blame the victim, but he's not the victim. Didn't comply, resisted arrest, reached for a weapon. This is a very straightforward situation. If cops can't react to that with force, up to and including lethal force, then we're not going to have a police force anymore. So now we find out that this wasn't what we were told. We suspected that was the case. Why didn't we get the information sooner? And even more troubling, the libs, the Democrats, Biden, all of them, they just don't care. It simply doesn't matter that we already now have additional facts to show that this was not some evil racist murder, that this was almost certainly not yet adjudicated by Internal Affairs or whoever does those kinds of investigations for the Kenosha PD, but almost certainly a justifiable use of force. So we've gone through now days of rioting, looting, mayhem, arson, killing. People died. And we'll talk about the shootings and updates on that as well. In this little city of 100,000 people in Wisconsin, we've gone through all of this. There are parts of the city that look like a war zone, that look like they've been bombed from the sky because people got upset because they saw a cell phone video of a cop doing what cops are unfortunately often in a position to have to do, which is to use force against a non-compliant subject who is resisting arrest. You'll notice you don't see in these cases that keep getting brought up by BLM. There are cases where law enforcement is far too aggressive. Police brutality is real. What's fascinating is that it's not about police brutality. when it comes to the BLM narrative. It's about white cops killing unarmed black men. And so that's what they have to look for. You're not hearing about this if it happens to a white person, a Hispanic person. It doesn't matter. Unarmed black white cop. That's the formula for the rage. That's the formula for the rioting. And so when those pieces are in place, that's all that matters. Look at Michael Brown. Michael Brown was legally and justifiably shot. The cop, based on Eric Holder's DOJ investigation and multiple African-American eyewitnesses to what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, the cop did nothing wrong. In fact, he should be commended for bravery in the line of duty. That's the truth. And yet, hands up, don't shoot. They still lie about it. They still make this claim that he's a martyr. The facts don't matter. The facts also aren't going to matter with Jacob Blake, my friends. They've already decided he's a martyr. I'm sure there already are murals being painted. And that's it. The left, the Democrats, they don't care what the truth is. They never did. And then you have to wonder, you have to ask, so did they just want the rioting and the looting to happen? Is that not a secondary effect, but actually the desired result? I'll leave that to you. The problem with dunking on CNN is that it's not possible to dunk harder on CNN than they dunk on themselves. It's not possible. They are beyond parody. You can't find a way to mock and ridicule their work, their unethical, disgusting narrative, more than they do if you just pay attention to what they're up to. Here is a CNN reporter. He is standing in front of a massive conflagration in Kenosha, one of these riots. But he wants you to know that, oh, guess what? Mostly peaceful. Play one.
What you're seeing behind me is one of multiple locations that have been burning in Kenosha, Wisconsin over the course of the night. A second night since Jacob Blake was seen shot in the back 7 times by a police officer. And what you are seeing now, these images came and come in stark contrast to what we saw over the course of the daytime hours in Kenosha and into the early evening, which were largely peaceful demonstrations in the face of law enforcement. It wasn't until night fell that things began to get a little bit more contentious. Things were thrown back and forth. Police started using some of those crowd dispersal tactics like tear gas, even playing very loud sounds to push them out. And then what you are seeing, the common theme that ties all of this together, is an expression of anger and frustration over what people feel like has become an all too familiar story playing out in places from across the country, not just here in Kenosha, Wisconsin.
That's a perfect example of, so you got to remember, he's standing in front of burned out buildings that are on fire. I mean, flames all over the place. Mostly peaceful protest. You know how they started to describe in the media Jacob Blake last night? Quote, otherwise unarmed, after the knife information came to light. These people are frauds, folks. What does COVID-19 have to do with you losing your home? Well, cybercrime, according to the FBI, is up about 75% since COVID-19 first hit. And guess what? Home title theft is a cybercrime. Here's how it works. Your home's title is online. The bad guys, cyber criminals, find it. Then they replace you with them on the title, and you get stuck with either the payments or perhaps even a foreclosure notice before you even know what's happened. This is so easy for the bad guys. You need to take action today. Go to HomeTitleLock.com. Home Title Lock can create a virtual barrier around your home's title to help protect you. If you're at HomeTitleLock.com and you use promo code BUCK, you can get 30 free days of protection. Plus, you can check to see if you're already a victim of this crime and don't even know it. Go to HomeTitleLock.com, promo code BUCK for 30 free days of protection. Again, HomeTitleLock.com, promo code BUCK. Always remember, my friends, that it was not the looting, the rioting, the arson, the assaults, the menacing, the destruction of our civil society that started to get the Democrats to just pump the brakes on this BLM insanity. Not stop it, just maybe just tone it down a little bit. BLM and Antifa lunatics. It wasn't all the terrible things that have come as a result of this. It was that all of a sudden Democrats realized that there was the possibility that this was negatively affecting their chances of getting power. That's all they care about. That's all that really matters to them. That's the only thing in this that really matters. And there's a Marquette University poll that is very telling. Why all of a sudden are you seeing Mayor Muriel Bowser in D.C., Democrat, come out and say that you should call the cops if people mob you like this and that this is unacceptable? Why is even Kate Brown, that idiot commie in Oregon, the governor, why is she saying, all right, we're going to hold you accountable, guys, stop with the criminal stuff? Well, what has changed? It's not that they feel badly for the small business owners whose lives have been ruined by this. It's not that they care in the least about what's actually going on to people day to day in this country. The suffering, the destruction, the misery. No, none of that really matters. What they care about, the reason that you're seeing a little bit of a shift away from this right now among Democrats, is that they are seeing a change in the polls. This Marquette Law School poll tells you the following. As of the middle of June, and they break it down here by race. This poll breaks it down by race. As of the middle of June, the white respondents to this poll, 59% approve of BLM and 38% disapproved. Okay? As of now, and this poll comes before Kenosha. This was from the 4th of August. But now this is making the rounds. People are saying the 4th of August, and I think they did some follow-up polling in the week or two after that. But this is not even taking into account Kenosha. And what we've seen this week during the RNC. White respondents to this poll, 45% approve, 51% disapprove. Now, you'd say that's a pretty dramatic shift. Now, I know it's only white respondents. It is notable that black or Hispanic respondents, that's how they categorize it, black or Hispanic. So they lump those two categories together, have had no change, really. Like 1%. I mean, statistically insignificant, no change at all. People that liked it then like it now. Doesn't matter. They burned down the whole country, and there are some people, white, black, Hispanic, libs. There are some people who will support Black Lives Matter no matter what it does. I mean, if Black Lives Matter was able to get control of nuclear silos out in the Midwest and decided they were going to hold cities hostage, they'd say, hey, you know, we really do need to tackle systemic racism. I mean, you know, to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs, you know. They don't care. Nothing will change their minds. Doesn't matter. So this is why all of a sudden Joe Biden is out there giving speeches. This is why there's been a shift. Or when I say out there, in the basement. But I mean, this is why he's stepping forward online to talk about this. And here is some of what he said yesterday. Here's Biden. Remember, I just told you about the Jacob Blake shooting, what really happened. Listen to how Joe Biden talks about this issue. Play 2.
What I saw in that video makes me sick. Once again, a black man, Jacob Blake, has been shot by the police in broad daylight with the whole world watching. You know, I spoke to Jacob's mom and dad, sister, and other members of the family just a little bit earlier. And I told them justice must and will be done. You know, our hearts are with his family, especially his children. It's horrible what they saw. Watching their father get shot. Like Gianna Floyd, they're asking why? Why daddy? Put yourself in the shoes of every black father and black mother in this country and ask, is this what we want America to be? Is this the country we should be?
A lot of things he says in here that I take issue with. For one, broad daylight. He's just emotionalizing the issue here, but what is that? Who cares that it's broad daylight? That has nothing to do, whether it's daytime, nighttime, 6 a.m., 10 p.m., who cares? But, he's trying to really, really get the theatricality of this going, oh, it was the most appalling thing I've ever seen. Look, watching any human being get shot, and there's other video of people getting shot because politicians would not actually shut down the mobs that were responding to the false narrative about the Jacob Blake shooting. So because people like Biden lie about this stuff, decisions are made that lead to other people dying. That's what's actually happening. They don't want to put it in that context. They don't want you to be clear on that, because then maybe you being the American people will vote them out of power, realizing that they're reckless frauds and morons. That's what the Democrats have become. But here's another part of this. He brings up the family and how horrible it is. And yes, any mother or father loses a son under any circumstances is going to think that it's horrible. Does anybody remember the last time Joe Biden gave a speech like this about a police officer being killed in line of duty? Why is he singling out this case right now? Because of the narrative, the Democrat narrative around this. Right? Much less interested in talking about the perils that face law enforcement every day. Much less interested in presenting the facts about what really happened here. And he says, is this what we want America to be? Let's just go to the narrative, the way that CNN frames this, all these other news outlets. Black man shot in the back 7 times. That's what you're supposed to take from this. Black man shot in the back 7 times. Shot a lot of times. It's in the back. It must be wrong. It must be illegal. And because the man shot is black and the man who shot him is white, it must be racist. Even though, as we know, a white person gets shot by a cop, a black cop. No one ever thinks that's racist, right? That's not that. The assumption is that there's no racism there. The assumption when a 5-year-old boy was executed in his front yard in North Carolina a few weeks ago by a black man was that there was no racial animus there. Now, I don't think we should make assumptions without evidence. But notice that the assumption always lines up with what the Democrats want it to be, which is that, see, this is racism. And it never goes the other way. And if you assume it in the other direction, that there could be some anti-white animosity involved in a crime, you're the bad guy. Automatically. You're a bad person for thinking that. Oh, okay. Did you hear Joe Biden mention anything about Jacob Blake going for a knife? Here's a different headline. Right? This is really getting into the gears of the propaganda machinery of the left. Here's another headline that would also be completely true, but you will not hear from mainstream media outlets. Man shot resisting arrest while reaching for knife. Fact. That's what happened. Those are all true things. Shouldn't that matter? Shouldn't that be something that is at least taken into account here before people burn down neighborhoods, before they attack strangers in the street? No. See, a movement based in a lie can only pile more lies atop itself. There is no fundamental honesty. There's no fundamental honor at the heart of the BLM movement. It is a Marxist propaganda power grab. That's what it is. Now we all see it. In the beginning, everyone had to run for cover. And at that point, I'll even tell you, some conservatives that I know, we were all saying, look, we got to wait for this thing to play out for a couple of weeks because you're just risking the boycotts, and you're charging the machine gun nest without a plan to take it. You're just going to get mowed down. For a few weeks, it was like the David Hogg situation all over again, where he, for a period of time, because he was elevated as this anti-gun hero of the left, could say whatever he wanted about somebody, and if you fought back, he could just wave his hand, and the corporate media would all go, "Oh my gosh, destroy that person." BLM was that times 100. BLM was a movement for a few weeks that if you did not bend the knee right away and say, "Oh my gosh, this is so horrible, what happened?" And look, I did think it was horrible because the video we saw looked awful. And you're not allowed to wait and say, "Hold on, is there more?" Is there more? Is it possible that George Floyd overdosed from fentanyl and that he did not die of asphyxiation from excessive force from a police officer? If you had said that in, early June, late May, you'd probably get pulled off TV, pulled off the radio. People would have just, now all of a sudden you're at least able. And people will fight against that narrative, and there'll be riots because of it. But you can bring it up. I think I have, so we'll see. Just point to the coroner's office report and say, that's what the people that are experts, that this is all they do, are telling you is the truth. But the truth doesn't matter to the libs and to the left right now. It doesn't matter. In fact, it just angers them. When the truth contradicts the narrative, we all know what the choice is that the left will make. Truth doesn't matter. Then that brings me back to Joe Biden, who in an effort here to try to staunch the bleeding a little bit in the polls is coming out and saying, yes, it's all so awful what happened to Blake, but maybe, guys, let's not completely destroy American cities in an election cycle where the Democrats are, no matter what they say, tied to the rioters and the looters. Play clip 3.
As I said after George Floyd's murder, protesting brutality is a right and absolutely necessary. But burning down communities is not protest. It's needless violence. Violence that endangers lives. Violence that guts businesses and shutters businesses that serve the community. That's wrong. In the midst of this pain, the wisest words that I've heard spoken so far have come from Julia Jackson, Jacob's mother. She looked at the damage done in her community and she said this, quote, "This doesn't reflect my son or my family. So let's unite and heal, do justice, end the violence, and end systemic racism in this country now."
How do we end systemic racism, Joe Biden? What does that mean? Ask libs this, and they get very indignant. Okay, how do we do that? Oh, isn't the justice system is racist? Okay, how? How do we fix it? What do you want? I don't know. They want the moral high ground so they can make demands for power that cannot be met with counter-arguments. That's what they want. That's what Biden wants. That's what Kamala wants. That's what the Democrat Party demands. We're to think that he just figured out now that violence and looting and arson and rioting aren't helpful in the cause of justice. This has been going on for months. Months. One after another. National Guard sent in, National Guard deployed, federal law enforcement officers surging, cops being attacked, buildings being burned. This has been the biggest news story in the country for weeks. And in some weeks, it has overshadowed the pandemic that has basically changed our way of life for the last 7 months. And Joe Biden's just having a moment now where he wants for people to know the violence is bad. It's almost like they're so cynical. It's almost like the Democrats and the media, the disgraceful, just putrid, vile mainstream media, CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times, the Washington Post, and then all the little sort of, bottom feeder lib media organizations, HuffPo and Salon.com and all these terrible places full of morons who just don't know anything and hurt the country constantly. Can't even make worthwhile arguments for their side. Just smears. Everything is racist. Everything is sexist. It's crap. They've all just started to see now, all of a sudden, that this is a bad idea for the country? No. But they're going to do what I told you yesterday. Now there'll be a series of news stories, not opinion pieces, news stories on how it's really hurting Trump that he can't get control of the situation. They create the fires, literally, and then complain when we don't put them out fast enough. That is the Democrat Party in 2020. Let's not let the Democrats do what we all know they're going to try to do. Separate themselves from the mob, the looting, the rioting going on, at least for a time being. Let this blow over a little bit. The optics, constant obsession of all politicos, the optics are very bad when in this week you have incredibly well-produced, compelling, memorable RNC speeches, montages. We need a montage. All these things together on the one side. And then on the other, you have people who hate Trump, who want to vote for Biden, destroying everything in sight. In Kenosha, in Minneapolis, in Portland, numerous American cities under siege by these lib lunatics. The formidable Kayleigh McEnany points out that the media and the Democrats, they're all over this. They can try to hide, but they can't. 5.
Well, first, we talk about COVID and the economy pretty much every day here at the White House with the president's briefings, but it's a real travesty that it took the Democrats this long to mention the violence in our streets, that it was ignored. When they had the biggest platform, it was entirely ignored. There are little babies like Legend Taliaferro that have died in their beds because of gun violence, and the Democrats have been deafeningly silent while we've taken action. And when you have the media aiding and abetting Democrats, CNN, for example, putting up a chyron about violent protests, then quickly removing the chyron and changing it to just protest. When you have CNN last night saying fiery but not violent protests, as there are literally fires and violence raging behind them, the media, the Democrats, are aiding and abetting the violence in the streets. And this president has stood strong in saying we will not let it spill into our neighborhoods like what we saw in Portland.
One side, the Republicans, President Trump leading them, say this is unacceptable. That not just the actual criminal activities of the looting, the arson, but the intimidation, the mob threats on the streets to people who are passersby, who just are trying to go about their lives. One side says, enough, we will stop this. The other side says, it's not that bad. And America's starting to see who's who.